Hello my friends, I'm Rich Larson and I'm the IRC Tire Guy. Today, as promised, we'll be giving my thoughts on and review of the all-new 2021 Gas Gas EC300. I started riding this bike in late 2020, and now that I've put a considerable amount of time adapting, feeling, and understanding this machine, I've really enjoyed the time I've put on this bike, and I'm excited to share some of the thoughts that I found really interesting. So let's get started by quickly talking about what this bike is. The fact is, the Gas Gas is another KTM or Husqvarna. It's the same engine and the same frame, but of course, there is a mix and match of parts between the brands. Now, does that mean the Gas Gas is going to feel exactly the same as a KTM or Husky? Of course not. The fact is, I've had two identical bikes of the same year, make, and model, race bike and practice bike, and I would have to get on my race bike a few days before the race to shake it down and adapt to the differences in the two machines. Two identical bikes with the same setup side by side will feel different. It's just the way it is. The problem with this situation is now there's two camps in the Gas Gas bike debate. Just like most things, there's one side that says this bike is exactly like a KTM, and there's another side that says it's a completely different machine, and once you ride it, you'll understand that. Like most things, people break down into tribes. There's usually a little bit of a team mentality when it comes to one brand or the other. And that's okay. It keeps things fun and competitive. But for me personally, I'm on team no team. I'm on team dirt bikes are rad. I'm gonna ride a bunch of them. Over the past 3 months, I've put a lot of time on a Sherco, a KTM, and now a Gas Gas. And every one of those bikes have pros and cons. But truthfully, so far, there hasn't been a lot of cons when it comes to the Gas Gas. So we'll start this review with the thing that everybody wants to know about. Is the Gas Gas's power different to that of a KTM or Husqvarna? My answer is yes and no. The problem with that question is the Gas Gas is a TPI. To properly explain this, I kind of have to talk in depth about my opinions on transfer port injection. So please bear with me. I know that I've rode at least 10 different TPIs, and they all run different. The fact is, there hasn't been a lot of consistency in the way the TPIs run, but that doesn't mean they aren't getting better. I'm sure KTM, Husqvarna, and now Gas Gas are all working hard to improve these bikes. I'm sure the goal is to make these bikes run like a well-carbureted machine, but an interesting realization that I had was I need to stop trying to make these bikes run like a carb bike and adjust my style to fit the TPI. The fact is, they'll probably never run the same as a carburetor, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Truthfully, I believe in all the advantages of the TPI system. Now that I've gone back and forth from TPI to carb and back to TPI, it's much more about adjusting and adapting my style to fit the bike and less about adjusting the bike to fit my style. I've learned that TPIs have a very linear power. Your actuation of the power delivery through your throttle hand is extremely important, and in my opinion, more important on a TPI machine. I believe that's where the sometimes explained as artificial feel of these bikes come from. But when I say artificial, I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean the input through the throttle hand seems to be more important. To me, the Gas Gas is no exception to this rule. It's still a TPI, but it's the best running TPI that I personally have ever ridden. And I think there are a few reasons for that. I'd say the first and obvious reason is these TPIs are improving every single year, and they're going to continue to get better and better. But beyond that, I'd say Gas Gas has adjusted the mapping. I'd be willing to bet they worked hard in dialing in the mapping, not only to run good, but a mapping that feels slightly different from its KTM and Husqvarna counterparts. Now that's expected. I've also noticed that the air boot is slightly different on the Gas Gas. I believe the way the air and fuel is delivered on the TPIs specifically really affects the power. Honestly, wrinkle an air boot in a carbed machine and notice the power difference. I think the TPIs are even more sensitive to air flow. But the truth is, whatever the small changes Gas Gas made, to me, they really hit the mark. The bike has that smooth linear power like a TPI machine, but it seems the mapping has some more extra snap. When testing, I not only like the well-rounded power for hard enduro, but the bike was a blast on the turn track and even on the enduro cross track. The bike is solid anywhere in the power. It's great in the top end revs, but also has that hard enduro lugability we all look for. One big difference in this machine compared to the bikes that I've tested in the past is, again, I've had to adjust my style. Instead of short shifting like I've done so much on previous bikes, especially carbureted bikes, I've stayed in one gear and focused more on actuating my throttle. The Gas Gas has a very predictable power. It puts out what you put in. I've been able to use the heavy snap that the bike has to get propulsion forward, but then I really focus on reducing the throttle and holding traction. I've added a lot more focus on my throttle hand. It's been interesting adjusting, and I hope it makes sense in the way that I'm explaining it, but I've really enjoyed riding the bike. Okay, so now that we've covered the engine characteristics of the TPI and the Gas Gas specifically, let's talk about the next question that everybody asked me pertaining to the EC300. How are the brake tech components? Starting with the front and rear brakes, simply put, I'd say they're a little softer than the Brembo counterparts, meaning you have to pull slightly harder to get the same amount of braking. Now, is that a bad thing? No, not really. In fact, after about 5 minutes of riding, I completely adjusted and totally forgot they were a different brand. Now, the clutch is where the difference lies. Brake Tech has predominantly been known as a Trials brand, and the clutch feels like a Trials bike clutch, which suits my style personally. It absolutely has that softer pull that everybody has been asking about. Now, why does the clutch feel different to that of a Brembo? I have some theories. Note that I haven't torn the master cylinder open and looked at the internals, but I'm just going off of feel. I'd be willing to bet the master cylinder inside the Brake Tech clutch is that of a 9mm. Now, what does that mean? 9mm is the diameter of the plunger that is moving the hydraulic oil. Most Brembos come stock with a 10mm master cylinder. I would always change this 10mm to a 9mm for softer pull and, in my opinion, an increased feel when slipping. Basically, the 9mm master cylinder has a wider pressure point than that of a 10mm. You have to pull the clutch in further to move the same amount of oil, which may sound like a bad thing, but when trying to hold traction in slick situations, it's actually a really good thing. Again, a lot of these small adjustments come down to preference, and I prefer the Brake Tech clutch over the Brembo. Basically, the power and the Brake Tech components are the big questions that I receive all the time. But what about everything else on the machine? The frame is that of a KTM. Of course, I love the aluminum subframe, and I've also liked the well-rounded feel of the KTM ergonomics. I'd say I prefer this modern KTM frame over any other frame. I like the flex of the steel frame over the rigidity of an aluminum frame. I like the ergos of the KTM at higher speeds over, say, that of a Sherco. Speaking of frame and feel that specifically pertains to the Gas Gas, the triple clamps are cast rather than billet that comes on KTM or Huskies. Does that make a huge difference in feel? Probably not. Of course, cast isn't as strong as billet and apparently will flex more. I think this is just another addition that was added to the Gas Gas to give the machine a slightly different feel. Now, the suspension on the EC300 comes with the Explore 48mm fork and the X-Act shock and linkage. Stock, this stuff is really solid. Now, I'd say for hard enduro, I prefer spring over air when it comes to WP components. And the suspension on the machine is great. After coming off the KYBs that came stock on the Sherco, I'd say there's still something to be desired, especially when it comes to higher speeds. But for hard enduro, this setup will do me just fine. All in all, the main characteristics of this bike are just different enough to make it feel like you're riding something a little bit different. KTM, Husqvarna, and Gas Gas are all rad bikes. And I think it's a valiant effort to tailor each of these machines to the different consumer. I'm excited to keep testing and really see what this bike can handle. And I'll be sure to put it through the ringer. If you have any questions on everything I've done to this bike or specific parts that I run, hit up the Moto Station and they'll be sure to help you out with all the specifics. We've got a lot more to come in 2021, so thank you so much for the support of the channel, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as well as follow us on Instagram at IRC Moto and my personal Instagram page at RichLarson511. And until next time, keep shredding.